As you have probably heard or seen for yourself, Resident Evil had a big showcase event. Along with several other announcements, we got a look at brand new gameplay for the Resident Evil 4 remake. To say people had opinions and thoughts about it would be an understatement. There are a lot of differing perspectives on this. Some people are straight hyped about it, some are already seeing red flags and holding the line that this game is going to ruin what made the original good in the first place. Finally, there are those like myself who are cautiously optimistic about the whole thing. I personally have a laundry list of expectations going into next March. I know the team who is working on this was the team behind the RE2 remake, and to some extent, that's giving me hope that the quality will be there. Unfortunately, Resident Evil 4 isn't the same thing as Resident Evil 2. It's a totally different animal. The variables in tone and setting, as well as the large cast of characters, completely separate RE4 from RE2. Finding success in one remake doesn't necessarily guarantee success with another. And I think we figured that out for ourselves. You know what I mean? Many of you may or may not know this already, but the developers have chosen to draw from the game's darker and more horror-centric roots found in early versions of RE4, like various demo builds and the famous Resident Evil 3.5 iteration. Hence why certain design choices have changed slightly for Leon and Ashley, as well as the overall focus on more straight-up horror moments. The biggest factors to finding success include, but are not limited to, balancing the tone between stylized action and grim atmospheric horror, maintaining Leon's personality in a natural way, preserving the iconic moments of RE4, and creatively adding onto RE4's story while not replacing it. It's a steep hill to climb, but that's what you're facing with a remake versus a remaster. Obviously, with various creative directives that formed over the many years since RE4's original release, the game's story is not exactly lined up with some of the newer narrative beats exceedingly well. With that said, I'm undecided if some of the story changes won't simply be a way of connecting the old story threads with the new ones. Nor should we forget that in many respects, Resident Evil 4 Remake is essentially being built up as a straight sequel to Resident Evil 2 Remake. There are a number of questions which arise from having that connective tissue between Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 4. Recall that the original RE4 made mention of RE2 and acknowledged it, but mostly treaded a new path. I think the one thing you can safely bet on with this remake is more of a focus on the complicated relationship between Ada and Leon. Obviously, it's no secret, but Ada Wong is designed to fill the femme fatale role within Resident Evil. Leon more or less represents the good guy character who has to struggle with the reality of whether he can truly trust Ada. She represents the classic allure of seduction and distraction in the hero's journey. Think of Ada as Jane Greer's Kathy Moffat from the classic noir film Out of the Past. And if you haven't seen that film, then what are you doing with your life? I definitely believe the focus on the back and forth of these two is one of the reasons for the devs' comments regarding Ashley not really being considered as any sort of supplemental romantic interest. Even though the original game hinted at a playful, if flirtatious attraction on Ashley's part, there's always been that constant of Leon and Ada throughout the years. Not that this is incredibly important, but I wanted to clarify why I think they've emphasized that Leon and Ashley will have a bond in this game versus any romantic tension. Also, it's quite likely this means the removal of the original game's iconic ending quip. It's such a great line and really feels like the perfect ending retort for Leon. However, given how they're planning to handle this minor adjustment to the dynamic between the game's two main characters, it wouldn't surprise me to see this omission. The other change is likely an attempt to make sure Leon feels like a natural progression from rookie cop on a bad first day to a government agent who is capable and confident. Leon in many ways felt almost like a superhero character in RE4. I'm not saying he wore a cape and flew around the levels, but there was certainly a larger-than-life feeling to him in the original game. I expect them to tone down that aspect of Leon a bit for the remake, in order to make it feel more realistically connected to the Leon we met in RE2 Remake. That's not to say Leon will be unrecognizable. I get the impression Capcom knows how much people like Leon's attitude and swagger from RE4, and have made an effort to blend that as much as possible into the remake. We've already seen instances of Leon dropping one-liners with wit and fashion. There's even confirmation some of the original lines will make a return. So while I'm very aware of the potential for them to remove some of the cool aspects to lean in on the horror stuff, I'm trying to play the waiting game and give them an opportunity to prove they understand the importance of getting his character right. Unfortunately for Capcom, their struggles don't stop there. As with any remake, we want to know about how the devs plan to update and simultaneously respect the original gameplay. There are clear crossover elements from the RE2 remake to this remake in terms of how the combat looks. However, the stun and kick mechanic from the original will return in full glory. Additionally, the movement and camera system are much more fluid than they were before. Of course, one would expect those changes to be made because it's been nearly 2 decades since the game first released. There has been one big change for the game, which has actually caused some controversy among fans. That being the choice to overhaul the melee system with a parry mechanic. Now, to be totally honest with you, I can 100% understand where people are coming from on both sides of this argument. It could be that the parry mechanic might be abused and remove some of the challenge. Absolutely. That is entirely a possibility. However, I noticed how, since it is a parry system, you can't simply hold down the button. It's a timing-based parry, meaning if you don't time it correctly, you're probably going to die. This sort of balanced approach to implement a parry seems like a fair compromise to me, which is why I'm not jumping up and down, wailing on about red flags. To be honest, I seem to remember how many people were complaining over the years about how many times they get insta-killed in the village due to Dr. Salvador and his stinking chainsaw. Maybe the developers heard these comments too and decided to include a parry system to soften the blow, so to speak. If we're really getting into the nitty-gritty with the parry maneuvers, I think it has something to do with the revamped knife for the RE4 remake. Apparently, updating the knife was something the gameplay team really wanted to do with this remake. My thoughts as to why are fairly steadfast in one clear direction. I believe the new knife and parry were specifically added to allow for a revamped boss fight with Krauser. The original knife fight was basically a cutscene with quick-time events. This time around, I get the feeling the developers are planning ahead for a more elaborate fight between the two. Utilizing gameplay knife and parry attacks would be an excellent way of updating the quick-time fight. Now, a particular concern for some with this remake is the fear of censorship. The original game came out in 2005 and featured many characteristic elements from that time period. Some 17 years later, we're looking at an industry that can oftentimes act as if it was afraid of its own shadow, especially if we're talking about being politically correct. In some cases, it's not so bad, with either a skirt being slightly less revealing on a female, or male characters being less likely to say some kind of edgy joke. In some cases, dialogue and characterization of males or even some females can be completely altered so as to appease industry media and critics. Not to mention, some games are so worried about being labeled misogynistic, they'll basically remove anything resembling the female form altogether. It's definitely a weird time we live in where an industry, once famous for its stylized characterization of both men and women, seems to be getting really shy about the very artistic freedom it once encouraged. Resident Evil is a franchise known for its stylized male and female characters. If we consider the fact that the original RE4 featured some moments, dialogue, and even character designs which could be viewed as controversial or problematic in today's industry, it does make one worry some of the story changes, especially with the characters, might be made specifically to cater to, in quotations, modern sensibilities. Personally, I don't think the Resident Evil 4 remake is trying to replace the iconic version of characters or moments for such a trivial reason. I would hope the developers have a little bit more backbone than to simply make changes because they're worried, about random internet articles. My thought is that the RE4 Remake's more focused and horror-centric tone has caused the game design and character design to be altered to reflect this tonal direction. Only time will tell what the future holds for the RE4 Remake. Hopefully the game won't fall into the trap many modern games have stumbled with in recent years. With any luck, this remake will be everything we are hoping it can be, without resorting to disrespecting the original game. I want to believe in Capcom's ability to produce great video games as they have shown many times in recent memory. But Resident Evil 4 is such a special game to myself and many others. It's the one game you can't mess up. It has to be treated with respect. If you plan on making changes, I would hope that the developers will be as tasteful and delicate as possible when altering things about one of the greatest video games of all time. While I have faith in much of the talent behind the remake of RE4, I'm still a little concerned they've left themselves enough room for making crucial mistakes, especially if they don't handle things right. This is why I'm cautiously optimistic about the Resident Evil 4 remake. But why don't you guys let me know what you all think in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, I ask that you would subscribe, click this like button, and hit that little bell over there for notifications so you don't miss out on any new videos as soon as they drop. Thanks again for watching, and have yourself a great day.